Hi guys, it's the Luchamediageek here again for the Burns redo. We're keeping with the horror theme for our second week. We're going to be looking at two Fright Fest entries. We're going to be looking at the movies Prowl and Husk. I, however, will only be looking at Prowl in this review because, in all honesty guys, I've been really busy and I'd like to be able to give the film my full attention when I review it, and I only really had the time to look at Prowl properly. So I'm just going to be doing Prowl, but the other guys will be doing Prowl and Husk, which, like we said, were two Fright Fest entries. These movies were recommended for review by Civilian Snowman. They're low budget horrors, they're Fright Fest entries, and I was kind of dubious because I like low budget horror from the 70s, 80s, 90s. I'm a little bit dubious about modern low budget horror, but Jack told me, he was like, these films are quite good and they're worth appraisal. So I tried to put aside my prejudgments and look at Prowl for what it is. Prowl is okay. It's directed by Tom Sivesian. He has a really strange name to pronounce, and the plot seems generic when I break through it. Basically, you have a group of teens. One needs to get to Chicago, and it's illustrated that basically the character of Amber needs to get to Chicago very quickly because she wants to see an apartment. She's very desperate to leave, and as is early in the film, I'll try not to give too many spoilers, but early in the film she is given a revelation that makes her even more desperate to leave. She takes a bunch of her friends along. They're travelling in a car which breaks, and there is a kindly trucker who stops and allows them passage, in the back of his truck. Now, this sounds like a fairly obvious and moronic setup, because in a lot of horror movies, you're like, oh, why wouldn't you be so stupid as to get back in the back of the truck, the big long articulated lorry? That can't possibly end well. What this film does quite well is there's a big chunk of the plot where it's big chunk of the running time, about 3-4 minutes, where it's just basically this trucker, debating whether or not he's even going to let them ride in the back of his truck. And in fairness, the performances are quite good. The guy playing the trucker, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Payne, Payne, and he's been in a few things. The guy he was the bad guy in Passenger 57, and whilst he has limited screen time, he really does a lot with it, because basically you go, this guy seems so harmless that, yeah, you probably would take the risk. Of course, with this being a horror film, you know that the truck, once sealed, they can't get out, and they are driven to an abandoned site where they are then hunted. I'm not going to give too much away after that. I've actually probably given too much away. I'm willing to forgive this movie quite a lot because whilst the setup seems pretty obvious, they're very well executed. The performances are like I said, the setup's very well executed and the performances are surprisingly fleshed out for a film like this. The character of Amber is likeable. There's the other teen characters do fall into somewhat quite obvious tropes and stereotypes. You have your alpha male, the jock, and then you have your nerdy one who, and this is kind of a problem for me with a lot of horror movies. To be honest, another horror movie, All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, did this. It's like kind of, yeah, the popular kids are gonna hang around with the talking nerd. Sorry, social groups don't tend to cross-populate like that, but then this is movie land, so what do I know? So the first act is essentially them stuck in this truck. The second act is them being hunted. What I like is the third act. The third act, whilst I wasn't bored, I was through the first and second acts, I was watching going, This is, you know, well done and quite effective for essentially. You got to remember these fresh movies are done on a low budget. They're, you know, horror festival circuit movies. But it's well executed, but nothing here I haven't seen before. And then you hit the third act, where whilst the movie doesn't become something else, it goes on a couple of interesting turns in terms of character and just the events of the story, and I really appreciated that. I think I actually appreciated the movie once, it sounds daft, once I'd seen the whole piece and understood where all the elements fell into place. I appreciated it a lot more. You appreciate it the most when you see it as basically, I watched it and thought the movie's only short, it's 87 minutes, and I watched it and thought that was a really good big long episode of The Twilight Zone. And if you see it in that context, almost like part of, you know, one of the old-timey science fiction horror anthology shows, it's really good. It in no way reinvents the wheel. It's way too reliant on cheap shocks, you know, buses, jumps, but it's effective, and they do make the most out of what's clearly a limited budget. Whilst, you know, they can never get away from the fact it's a limited budget, it never looks cheap. And they don't overuse pyro, but the pyro that's there is very effective. So horror films and action films as well, I tend to find in the final act throw fire around like it's nothing, so the actual effect of fire is diminished. But in this film, fire burns, fire hurts, it's an incredibly destructive force. So yeah, can't really go on about too much about Prowl, because, you know, it's just, this sounds like I'm detracting away from it. It's just a horror film. It's just a straight teens in peril, you know, dark episode of Scooby-Doo horror movie. You've seen it many times before. It's done very well, but like I said, stick with it until the third act, where it does go somewhere really interesting. I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it a hell of a lot more, and other people will be reviewing Prowl and Husk on this channel in the coming days.